Zoom to restream to live television stations and to radio stations. Welcome, Samia Nkrumah. I will not be introducing you. When are you going to run to become the president of Ghana? Unmute yourself at your end.
For now, I hope to run for Parliament 2024, to re-enter the Parliament of Ghana.
So you don't have a presidential ambition yet?
Not at the moment, no.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to invite Dr. Miriam Abawa to start this interview going. Mary is the communications lead at the Cybersecurity Authority, leading the communications team to create cybersecurity awareness and secure Ghana's cybersecurity space through regulations. And it has been a privilege to interview so many distinguished people. And recently she interviewed the president of Ghana, and she has received various awards. She has a bachelor's of education in peace, master's in peace studies and communication, MPhil degree in communication. And before joining the CSA, she taught at the Department of Communication. Welcome, Dr. Bauer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Falula. I've told you I'm not a doctor yet. I've told you. I don't know, but you keep calling me a doctor. I take it though. But I really am very grateful for this beautiful introduction. Yeah, Madam Samia, happy birthday, belated, of course. I was just celebrating you in my own way and singing the song alongside with you. We really celebrate you. It's 63 years, right?
63, yes. Awesome. I was born on the year Ghana became a republic.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for availing yourself for this great conversation. It's been my passion and desire, really, watching your movement in Ghana's political space is kind of phenomenon for me. And growing up as a child in my village, there were so many tales about Kwame Nkrumah, his family, you know, and I remember I really took a lot of delight asking my grandmother a lot of questions about the Nkrumah family. But of course, because she was unlearned, she didn't have much to say, except the popular phrase of Fatia Fata Nkrumah. Did you ever hear that?
Oh, countless times, of course, including the famous Kente pattern.
I know.
With the blue, green.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Of course, to the non-Ghanaians who are listening, Fatia Fata Nkrumah means Fatia deserves or is worthy of Nkrumah. So it tells that beautiful story of a couple that is, you know, kind of chasing freedom for Africa. Madam Samia, your father, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, our first president, is certainly idolized by the continent. His courage, his fortitude of seeking freedom for the continent needs no retelling. And of course, he's been celebrated by academia, even within the diverse political divide in Africa. How did his impressive political resume influence your career choice as a politician?
Yeah, it really has everything to why I returned back home after a long absence, why I entered active politics, why I still want to continue the journey, why I feel I owe it to the legacy to make a contribution to Ghana's development, Africa's prosperity, and Africa's unity, really. And following our father's guidelines, when we say Africa, we mean African people everywhere. Not just on the continent, but all Africans living outside the continent, including the Caribbean states, of course. And so, indeed, I think it's our generation's mission and the one after us that we just have to do our best to find a way to work together and plan everything together, from our economies to our armies to our everything. I think that's our purpose, and yeah, it's basically the reason why I'm here even.
I see the massive influence, the kind of path that your late father charted for you within the political land space. But let's look at Africa. The continent appears to be, some would say, under siege by China, by Europe, by the United States, who are battling for resources like oil, like gold. And for more than a century, gold has been mined on the Ghanaian soil, and it is still being mined. Now, that's a nation that is indeed endowed. In the midst of the abundant resources, many economies in Africa are ailing. And some, including your beloved country, Ghana, my country, have resorted to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. This is a recurring phenomenon. Coming from the perspective of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who said the African is capable of managing his own affairs, do you think we have demonstrated this capability in managing our own affairs? And what should Africans do in the light of this recolonization of our resources?
I think there's always been a great demand for our resources, our natural resources, our people, our mineral, natural wealth, our land, what's on top of it, what's under it. This has always been the case because we are rich. We are a rich, fertile continent. But I think we tend to forget what our father said on the eve of our independence. I don't think we've paid great attention to it. He said the independence of Ghana is meaningless. Meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation and unification of Africa. And by Africa, he means the expanded definition of Africa, of course. So he said it. He knew what he was talking about. He'd lived 10 years in the States, studying, working with Africans there, workers, students, intellectuals. He spent 2 years in Britain, working, studying also with Africans, establishing or organizing the 5th Pan-Africanist Congress in Manchester that heralded our independence and unity as a people. So he knew what he was talking about. He had been in a partial power situation from 51, power sharing with the British, till 57. So by the time he made that declaration, he knew what he was talking about. So basically, our country was born as a Pan-Africanist country, not to remain in isolation, struggling in isolation to build our nation, change the structure of our economy. No, we were meant to work with others to bring prosperity. So unless we work with other African countries, African states, unless we integrate our economies and we plan on a continental basis, it will be very difficult for us to manage our economies. It will be very difficult for us to change the system that is currently oppressing us. Like you said, we are not getting much for our natural wealth because we are not in complete control of our sovereignty or our economy. So the remedy has been given, and the blueprint to implement that remedy has been given, but we've never really taken it seriously, thinking that on our own we can change things. But it is very, difficult, because if you take our country today, let's just take the example of our annual GDP. It's what, annually? 2 years ago, I think the World Bank had said about what, $77 billion annually. Compare it now to that of Japan, industrialized countries, 4.9 trillion. The USA, 23 point something trillion. The EU, we are talking about trillions here, but we are talking about billions. And even the GDP combined of the whole continent, you will be talking about 2 point something trillion. But that's because you are combining isolated economies. But the day you combine an economy that is fully integrated, working together, I think we will be talking about a much higher annual GDP. So, and that's a reflection of the economic activities, the goods, services a country produces over a period of time. So I think we do not need to sweat and look far for the way to tackle these problems, whether it is exploitation of our natural resources, our inability to fight big financial interests or multinationals. We need not look further than working together as a bloc.
I'm interested though, because I was listening to you keenly talking about, trying to digest in your own way the level of invasion. What role have we played in this, entire development? Have we been inactive or passive in this development?
No, we haven't, because a lot of people have sacrificed and suffered. We had the whole independence struggle, relatively peaceful compared to, say, countries like in Southern Africa or in the North. In the case of Algeria, we didn't have to go through an independence war, but still people lost their lives, lost their livelihood, their comfort. People struggled for this independence. Our father himself paid a heavy price for charting the way and saying things, as speaking as a prophet, saying things as they are without fear or favor. So no, we struggled, we tried. So it took us, some years, a decade or more to gain more, actually, because if you start with decades to gain our independence, right? So we've been trying. And since independence too, we've tried, we've implemented some laws, we've tried with free education, we've done things. We've started under our father to build up our manufacturing base. We started things. We formed alliances with our other countries and non-aligned movements. The whole Ghana played a very important instrumental role in the formation of the African Union, or what was the precursor, the Organization of African Units. So we tried, we definitely tried. And even in our case in Ghana, after political instability, military rule, a number of coups, we struggled to come back to constitutional rule, multi-party politics, but of course, with some imperfections and things are not what we want them to be, but we've been trying. We never stopped trying to make things better. But I think, to speak to your question, I think where we have not done too well is in keeping a united front or reaching consensus on the most important things, our priorities for our development, to make life worth living, really, for every single African. I know I'm narrowing it back to Ghana because that's where I've had some experience, or I've taught the whole country when I was at the helm of the Convention People's Party. I know rural Ghana very well. I've represented the rural constituency. And I think what we really need to focus on now is how can we unite people of influence in various sectors of our society so that we make a change where it matters most.
In fact, that's where, Madam Samia, that's where I was actually coming to. But I possibly would want to leave that question hanging because there seem to be a lot of literary works, a lot of commentaries that also suggest, with of course evidence to the fact that, look, there are certain elements within the continent that are benefiting from, this level of invasion. But I believe that Professor Falula will come in. So I will leave that there. But let's talk about Africa's democracy, if that's fine with you. The democratization of Africa seems to center on elections for the selection of leaders. And in some nations, the civil liberties required for the the full participation of citizenry in government or governance have been stifled. A typical example is Nigeria. I mean, recently during the elections, we had some, violence breaking in certain communities and constituencies that denied some people from voting. What else needs to be done to make our systems of governance effective in delivering the expectations of the majority of the people?
First of all, I think let us understand that we are no strangers to democracy. We've always practiced democracy in different ways, but even from our indigenous culture traditions, in our chieftaincy, traditional way of life, we've always practiced democracy, but it's slightly different. It has a different model from multi-party politics. But even more recently, like in the case of a country like Ghana, the way we gained independence was through democratic constitutional means. That's why we had to go through 3 elections, 51, 55, 54, and then 56, before we could convince the British colonial power that the majority of Ghanaians indeed wanted independence now. So we are no strangers to even multi-party democracy as such. But it is the manner in which we are practicing it that perhaps is inadequate. It is not helping us deliver on the promise of our independence. And many Ghanaians have been brainstorming on this, especially recently, whenever we want to talk about constitutional reform, that now 30 years after using one constitution, it is time to, what do we use? Either revise it or review it. Thank you, review it. So one of the most often repeated things, and I fully agree with that, is that, of course, it's time now to interrogate and really do away with the winner takes all situation. So the winner takes all and the loser takes what? Nothing at all. So this creates not just tension, but also the feeling amongst a big chunk of voters that their voice is completely silenced when they lose. It's like a game. You win or you lose. But that's not what our politics is about. Not in our even traditional sense, that communalism, that feeling that we need until we reach consensus. And so one saying a constituent, the one votes. But those 19,500 voters completely lose any kind of representation, you know? Gone. So should we be considering a slightly different system like proportional?
Rather unfortunate, I think Madam Samia might have had some network issues.
And she will rejoin us. And while waiting to rejoin us,
Prof, whilst we're waiting for her to join us, I just want to have your own thoughts on, you know, the level of participation of the African people in what the continent or where the continent finds itself now. Because we have a lot of Pan-Africanists who talk about, look, we need compensation from Europe. You know, our resources is being taken away from us. But objectively, can we assess our level of contribution to this development?
Thank you very much. On the side of our people, I think there's a consensus that they want good governance. Where I think there's no consensus is whether democracy is the only option to deliver that good governance. So there are contrary opinions saying, look, if this democracy doesn't deliver good governance, can we now try another system? And what system do they have in mind? The Chinese model, in which you can govern through bureaucracy. Okay, Samia, please.
Madam, we have you now, so I guess we can give you the opportunity to make conclusion on your contribution to the question of Africa's democracy. You were muted. Please unmute.
Okay, can't remember exactly where I stopped. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can't remember exactly where I stopped, but I think what I would like to say, what I was trying to say is that we need to refine and improve our democracy, the way we are dealing or practicing it, multi-party democracy. We need to refine it, improve it, so that it's more inclusive. And at the same time, not just more inclusive for its own sake, but more inclusive so that we can deliver on the promises of independence and make a contribution to raising the standard of living, because that's ultimately the reason for practicing democracy. It's to make everyone have a say. And if everyone's voices matter, then everyone's life must automatically improve a little. So we need to definitely look at that. We need to stop this concentration of power, because it's not working. If it were working, we would think of something else. We need to consider how we can bring different views and how we can go back to our indigenous knowledge system, even in politics, not only in medicine. And I don't mean just go back, but use it, use what is good and relevant and powerful in it, you know, for our own development. So what in politics, not just in nutrition, in education, of course, but also in politics, in how we govern ourselves, because it is even useful in addressing issues that are very intractable, difficult, issues that are to do with the general system, you know, like corruption. Because if we go back and see how we addressed issues, we were very keen, you know, on thinking of the collective, not just the individual interest, individual power, individual wealth. No, you know, things had to be shared, or everybody had to be taken into account. And this is a very civilized, very sophisticated, I think, way of living. And this is the future for humanity. We all have to sacrifice a little for everybody else. We are a drop of water in the ocean. We are not in isolation. And that has to be ingrained, has to be taught in schools, in everything. I mean, what comes to mind is the Young Pioneer Code of Conduct. You know, the Young Pioneers, an organization set up during our father's time in power, and young people were imbibed with this code of ethics and conduct. I can't remember the whole list, but love of country, discipline and honesty, punctuality, and the list goes on and on, you know? So and imagine when this is ingrained in you at a very early age. So you become something, even if you lose some of those teachings, but something remains. And you adapt it and you adopt it in all the avenues of your life, in everything.
It becomes your identity, Let's still talk about Africa's democracy, though, because there is a growing trend of let's go to court cases after unfair or perceived unfair election process. And this development of electoral judicial decision, if allowed to fester, could pose a danger to governance in Africa. What is the role of government, of political parties, of international partners in building confidence in our electoral process through free and fair elections?
Yes, but I think this is also related to the winner takes all phenomena, you see? Because if you have to win at all costs, if winning, the difference between winning and losing is like heaven or what's the opposite of heaven? Purgatory, the hell, the hell. If that is how it is, then of course, things will become so contentious that you will need an arbiter, you will need an external body to settle matters, But no, politics, part of the responsibility of politics and politicians is to bring people together to do things, good things for ourselves and for our countries, So this doing things together includes negotiating together, forming coalition governments, partners. We need to understand that the more united we are, even as a state, the better it will be for our economy, for our social life, because that gives us the opportunity to hear each other out, to respect each other, to be tolerant of each other. I have my convictions and I'm so convinced of them. I believe in them so much. But at the same time, I'm willing to listen to the other. And if for the sake of progress, for the sake of going a step higher, I need to compromise a little, I will do it. I'm not losing my principles, but I'm willing to give in so that more and more are comfortable and so that we can forge forward. And so that is part of being in politics, part of being at any position of leadership, is to be able to listen and accommodate others. So why are we not doing it with our politics, multi-party politics, with elections, and so that we need to change the system. We need to adopt another system of multi-party politics that is more accommodating and more representative of many of us.
And here to Professor, I know that you have a lot of questions to ask, so I will leave it for you to possibly deliberate on that. But let me just ask this question before the next person is called to the call to also ask. The current president of Ghana, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, came into office on the back of promises to deal with corruption. He came with promises of improving the economy, of providing free education for senior high schools and industrialization via the one district, one factory policy. Madam Samia, what is your objective, your candid assessment of the performance of the tenure of the NPP government, the Akufo-Addo's administration?
Before I specifically answer this, because I think this is also part of the problem, the way we deal with our governments and the way we tackle certain problems, national problems. What, from my experience in politics, what I've seen is that in every political party, in every faction, in every group, there are better politicians, there are better people, and there are worse people. So every party has good people and bad people, and has bad people too. And it is my wish that one day we'll find a way of fishing out those better ones and putting them together to govern.
Is that possible? Is that possible?
Everything is possible. Everything is possible. And I think many are coming to that realization, because if you go strictly by party politics in a very narrow partisan way, you will get dissatisfaction, because you are obliged to lead in a certain way by including different factions who you might not even be comfortable with. I speak from experience. I was a leader of a party, but honestly, I was not in full control because I had to accommodate certain
interrupt you by welcoming the president of Ukraine, who has joined us. Your Excellency, joining us. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't hear.
Ukraine has joined this conversation. Thank you.
Who has joined, please? I didn't hear.
Ukraine president.
Okay. So I was saying, where was I at? Okay, I'm trying to give a prelude to my answer, because I think it's very important, and it goes to the heart of how we deal with how we are doing our politics, basically. So we were saying, I remember now, that I wish that the best people from different parties could form a government and become our decision makers. I think things would go much, much better. And I was saying that, speaking from own experience, as a leader of a small political party, I realized that I was not always in full control, and that I was blindsided at times to my own detriment, whether intentionally or not. So I want us to move above partisan politics for the sake of our development. We have to come to that realization. We need to understand that we cannot be stuck along strict partisan lines if we want to deliver to our people.
But within the larger scope, Madam Samia, within the larger scope of development, as education, as industrialization, the drive, the health sector, the drive to fight corruption.
Yes.
And my question, I go back to the question, because I believe that on the wings of these promises, Ghanaians voted for the NPP administration.
Absolutely.
Next year, we are going back to the polls. What's your assessment of the NPP administration?
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. I don't even go by this. I don't go by assessing NPP or NDC, but because I believe that they might come with different promises, but the system that is governing them, that is tying their hands, is almost the same. So we need to break loose of that system. But let me come to specific programs that the NPP government has espoused or introduced. Free secondary school education. Yes, it's a must. Education is a right. It's a right. We can't even think, we shouldn't even be debating whether we should have free education or not. We should have free education. And the day we get our finances in order, we should have free education all the way, as some of the Scandinavian countries are doing. Number two, opening up to the diaspora, the African or the global African family. I think that's another thing that's in the right direction, because it's something we need to do, but we need to do even more vigorously, not just to give 500 odd Africans from abroad citizenship, but we need to give more citizenship. We need to include them more into integrate them more rather into our economic life. We need to even integrate them in our political life, the right to vote, contest, stand for elections. I think the diaspora, what we call the diaspora, for want of a better word, is an integral part of our Africanness, our identity, our society. So that the year of return, beyond the return, it's a necessity, it's a requirement. And yes, I would give that a nod too. Now, come to industrialization, what you said, industrialization rather, the one district, one factory, planting food. I consider that also a bit agro-industry, industrialization, planting food, is it food for jobs or whatever it's called, all in the right direction. But we realized along the way that maybe we didn't have the finances, the funding, the right, something was missing. So we cannot implement those policies to the degree that would have had an incredible effect. Added to that, of course, is the pandemic, and the pandemic, the war, all external forces, the Russia-Ukraine war, external forces that really have made us shake badly. So we realize that our economies, we are embroiled in debt. We cannot stand on our feet. And that is because we cannot do things, not the NDC, not the NPP, not any political party. We cannot get our economy right without working, integrating with other African countries. We will struggle, we will try, but it won't be easy. It won't be easy, and it might take a very long time. And the least problem that comes our way will shake us so hard that we'll be back square one. So our problems and our solutions go way beyond an NPP government or an NDC government or a CPP government. And this is what the conclusion I'm coming to as someone who's entered politics, who sat in parliament, who's deliberated on policies. The conclusion I'm coming to is that we need to go back and we need to sit with other African states and try and figure out how we are going to build those industries that we badly need and become self-sufficient and become at least more productive. We need to figure that out with our other African brothers and sisters.
Okay, I think I'll hand over to Professor Falula to just take over, because I know there are a lot of other questions coming your way. Prof.
Thank you very much, Amabawa, and thank you so much, Ms. Samia Nkrumah, for giving us ideas on retooling the nature of democracy and governance, trying to create government by consensus, bringing everybody together. We are very grateful. I don't want to embarrass you. Some people must have called you in Nigeria or Ghana, Oyinbo, 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 thinking you are a white person. and they may not know the origin of how you came to acquire this cane, which is part of a Pan-Africanist project in which the great Nkrumah married your mom from Egypt. So, and the reason I'm asking this question is about the outrageous statement of the president of Tunisia, who went public to say that Black people are trying to destroy the Tunisian Arab identity. I used to go to Egypt once a year when Mubarak was in power because I serve on various committees, including the Afro-Arab Summit. And on the street in Cairo, they were calling me Obama, 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 Obama. And some of us have been criticized for not talking enough about Arab Orientalism, that we accuse Americans and white people and Chinese of racism, but we don't accuse Arabs of racism. I know it's a difficult question as someone who is an Egyptian and an African, but how will you respond to this controversy? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it has to be dealt with, and I'm happy you've brought it up. It's upsetting a lot of Africans, and it's inexcusable. I mean, no conscious no conscious African from North Africa would say something like that, obviously, because Africans are Africans all over. It's not about color, it's about so many other things. And then, like you rightly said, I mean, some of us I've lived all over the world, Anya, and I've always been called Black everywhere, except, yes, in some parts of Ghana where they tease me and say, you know, Obroni in Zima, for example, where our father comes from, where I used to be an MP. So, I mean, there's color. We also have to move a bit away from the color. It's not about color. It's not, our father used to say, it's not a racial alignment, you know, but we will come to that. Speaking about African unity, it's a political project, a conscious, deliberate project to improve our situation. But back to that, yes, we have to address racism there. But I would like to add, before we discuss it further, that it's not institutionalized racism. It's a different kind of, it's on a much lower level, and certainly not amongst conscious North Africans. You see, and I want to go back a bit to our history. You mentioned our parents' political Pan-African marriage, because that's what it was. They didn't know each other before they met, and they got married the same day they met. So they were determined to go through with it. Our father initiated it, yes, but the support of the then leader of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, made it possible, because the family were terrified, of course, of sending their daughters 7 hours away to a country they barely heard of, and to Black Africa, if you will, yes? But that marriage did so much to bring North Africa closer to the rest of the continent, symbolically. It was this powerful symbol of Pan-Africanism, and it worked to a large extent. And North Africa helped liberation movements all across the continent in a very powerful way. I mean, from Cairo to Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria too. We helped Algeria, Ghana helped Algeria, and Algeria in turn, when they gained their independence, they were powerful supporters and helpers of the liberation movements in Southern Africa and other parts of the continent. Why? When we went to Ghana, to Cairo, after the illegal overthrow of our father's government. We found Lumumba's children there. They were there before us. After Lumumba was murdered, they sought refuge in Cairo of all places. So the independence of the whole continent rested on the fact that the North, East, South, West, everybody put their hands together to work together to defeat colonialism. So we cannot, these are facts. We cannot forget that. And it shows that when you are conscious of your identity, this question of racism will just disappear, go away. But of course, we need to call it out whenever it presents itself, but it stems from many things: ignorance, lack of understanding. I mean, let's read Sheikh Anta Diop and how the great Senegalese thinker, and how he showed us that even I mean, aside from one of his main theses, the Black Pharaohs, proving that the Pharaohs were Black people, but he even talks about people who are in modern day Ghana today, the Akan people, how some of them came actually from Egypt. So there is no excuse, but no even place for racism with knowledge. We just need to enforce this and promote this African knowledge, African history, African culture. Let's look deeply into our history and culture, and we find that really there's no place for that. But yes, you are right. We need to talk about it. We need to address it. We need to, but even in countries that, okay, before, like when I was growing up, maybe being Black with frizzy hair was not so attractive. But now with the success of the, Africans in the States with the hip hop and R&B and all these kind of genres, they've gone everywhere, that young people now, they don't mind leaving their hair a bit, even some Egyptians leaving their hair a bit curly, a bit frizzy. I mean, things have changed a bit. They've changed a great deal with that. So we need to familiarize ourselves with each other, but we need to go back to our African knowledge, definitely. It must be the basis for everything we do.
Thank you very much. To remind everyone, this interview is being live streamed in radio stations and televisions, and the number watching it is larger than the population of Ghana as I'm talking now. So we thank members of our audience who are appearing on Zoom, over 300 of them. We use the Zoom as a restreaming device because people are also watching on Facebook and Twitter, televisions, and listening to this interview on the radio. Next week, Sunday, we are talking about Amata Haidu, bringing 4 distinguished speakers to reflect on our literature and on Ghana. And a week after, we are inviting a former Minister of Defense from Nigeria to talk about security issues in West Africa. We thank all of you. For those of you who have been raising your hands to talk, it's not your turn. Well, it's not the turn of the audience. It's after our 3 distinguished interviewers have done. Madam Samia Nkrumah is not involved in the selection of those who are interviewing her, so that I can be very clear. It's a team of researchers led by PhD student Victor Angba, who selected the 3 distinguished interviewers. And we have to be very transparent about this. The next distinguished person to interview Madam Cynthia Nkrumah is Dr. Evelyn Folake Kisi, who is described as African tri-citizen, Black disability, transnational scholar of Ghana, of Nigeria and Canada. She does work on Black critical disability, transnational studies, global health, lifespan studies, and she has a PhD in critical disability studies. She's currently teaching at the University of Ghana in the Department of Teacher Education. She's accomplished, she's well published, and she's very distinguished. Welcome, Dr. Evelyn Kisi. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone.
No.
I'm good. And Ekason, Professor Falola, thank you for the introduction. And also, happy belated, Madam Samia. It's a pleasure to be interviewing on the same platform with Kwame Nkrumah's daughter. So I am humbled by this opportunity. And welcome to everyone joining us on the world stage. So I will start, with some quotes from the Daily Graphic. As you heard Prof. Falola mention, my focus is more into early childhood and disability. So we'll focus more on your childhood, right? So there was a quote on Daily Graphic that stated that when I was younger, it felt that we, Nkrumah's immediate family, had to take second place in his life. We did not see much of our father, and we did not spend much time with him. But as I grew, I say that in a sense, his presence with us has been constant and powerful. And his influence on us has been understandably huge. Then you went on and say that I have said before that while he left us no material inheritance, he left us a rich consciousness that continues to guide us in our lives. In light of this quote, Madam Samia, I would like to ask you to further unpack this statement. What did had to take second place in his life meant to you during your childhood?
Yes. So I was referring to the fact that, needless to say, he was so busy. Our dear father was so busy that, yes, he was not always there with us. But when he was just like any other father. Because in fact, what I also remember is that he never told us to keep quiet or go away. So even when he came home to eat or read, he will even be reading or writing, and we are running around him. And he wouldn't say anything. He would want us to be there. He would insist on giving us a spoon of honey in the morning, which we hated because we didn't like sweet things at the time. So he was very busy. He traveled a lot. He would come late. But when he did appear, he was very approachable and very much with us, close to us, carrying us, allowing us to be near him, even if he was doing something like reading or writing. So that's what I meant, that from an early age, I understood that we had a particular kind of father, let me put it this way, a father who was not only for us, but who had something or the other, something very important to do that would take him away from us. So we grew used to sharing him and to not claiming him for ourselves. I believe that's what I meant by that phrase. And it is true, and that's the way with political families, but particularly at that time, Because what people don't realize is that at that time, there were some elements in politics which, at least in Ghana, are no longer here. And I want to just give one example. One of the assassination attempts on his life that happened inside the house where we lived, Flagstaff House, which would be like the president's residence, if you will. And he's walking from his office in the compound to have lunch, and gunshots, I heard they are aiming at him. Someone is aiming at him, and his trusted bodyguard dies on the spot. And there's a scuttle. He runs for the assassin and he pins him down and screams for help, cries for help. Anyway, by the time we did see him, we saw our father entering the living room with his white top covered in blood. So, of course, as a child, when you see these things, you might not understand what's going on. You might not know what's happening, but something is triggered. You understand that there is something aside from just being a father who's catering for you and coming to give you food. No, there are other things going around and happening in your house, in your household, with your parents.
Sorry, I'm muted. Thank you. That is very encouraging, especially as a child, seeing your father full with blood and while at home with family. And I think this question, we will come back to it if we do have time, but how you as a child seeing that, how did you deal with that childhood trauma? But my second question to you is, speak to us about this growing up with such a father. What type of conversations did you have with him, if any, and how emotionally connected was he to you as his only daughter? I would love to know that. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, there are maybe few incidents along the way that would answer your question better than anything I would say. Okay, and let me maybe start by the day of the overthrow of his government, because by the end of that day, 24th February 1966, we left Accra for Cairo, where we sought refuge for the next almost decade, the next 10 years. But anyway, that particular day, by the time our father was informed of the overthrow, he had reached China. So he calls us. We are in Cairo, so he calls us just to reassure us. And each and every one of us, I don't know, a minute, if you can't remember how long the conversation was, but he spoke to us. So what I remember is what he told me, because I was crying that whole day out of fear, trauma, you name it. My overriding fear was that they will separate us, the family. So our father tells me on the phone, Yaba, which is my Ghanaian name for girls born on Thursday who come from a certain part, the western part of Ghana. And he said, Yaba, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Be strong. I don't want you to be afraid. Be strong. He said other things, but that remained with me. And I always remember it, when whatever I'm doing, when I'm speaking, because I feel really he's talking perhaps about that day and my fears as a child. But as I keep on hearing the voice, I'm thinking, no, he's talking about something bigger than that, He's talking, telling us not to be afraid, not to be afraid to hold our convictions, to do what we think must be done, to just move in life, without that fear, and definitely to go back to his legacy and do something about it, because it's worth picking up, it's worth upholding, it's worth championing and promoting. So even though our father wasn't there, but that's what I meant when saying that his influence was so huge. Now, in addition to that, you can imagine the number of visitors who would come to the house, who would talk about him, talk about his ideas. But more than anyone else, actually, it's the stories our mother told us that gripped us, me in particular, the most. Because of course, mother suffered. Of course, she went through hard times. Of course, she was young. She was almost half his age. They only lived together for 8 years before, his government was toppled and they were separated, and that was it. They never met again. He passed on 6 years later, and they had never met since. So really, mother paid the utmost price for this, for the political upheaval. But the stories she told us, many of them reinforced that commitment to the legacy. Many of them made us even more curious, more, more patriotic, more, more in need to do more or to do something. Even returning to Ghana almost a decade later at the invitation of, the Achampong governments had changed, military government, but one that you could say was pro-Nkrumah in a way.
Madam Nkrumah, there's a forthcoming manuscript that portrays him as very bitter and depressed in exile.
What is that?
Yeah, it's just a privilege for me to have read it.
Okay. By who?
I won't say because it's a confidential.
It's not yet published. Okay.
So, were you with him in exile?
No, we were not. We spoke a few times on the phone. There was some very small correspondence, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe at times he was bitter, at times it was hard, not even only when he was in Guinea. And he made a point of saying he's not in exile because he's at home in any African state. And the then leader of Guinea, Sékou Touré, had made him declared him co-president. And I know for a fact from what Mrs. Sékou Touré had told me, I visited her a few years earlier, every evening they were there, either herself or Sékou Touré, to have a meal with him, an evening meal with him, and discuss, what's happening in Guinea, in Africa. So back to that, what I was saying is, even when he was here, there were very difficult moments. There were over 7 attempts on his life. So I get frustrated by even, comparatively minor things. I get angry. If you hear me sometimes when I'm angry or screaming, you will think this is a bitter, crazy woman. But the dominant thinking, how can a man who's so bitter write so many books, be consistent with his political thoughts, be so lucid and clear, continuing his thesis on African unity? We are human. We cannot be perfect. We lose control. We are sad. We are depressed. But what matters is our overriding thinking, what we give to our people. Prophets suffer. And I consider Kwame Nkrumah an African prophet because he said it all and gave us a blueprint and a guideline. Prophets suffer terribly, but that's just the human side of it. That's not the overriding contribution. That's not why they came to Earth. They didn't pass by for us to say they suffered. They passed by to leave us something, a lifeline to improve our condition.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. My third question to you, Madam Samia, is how has the legacy of rich consciousness that you mentioned in the quote that I read guided you as a Ghanaian Egyptian to work with the Ghanaian side of your being? And do you think that Ghanaians allowed you in because of the different sides of you, your tie to Egypt, and the color of your skin?
Okay, I didn't hear that. Do I think Ghanaians? Okay, let me answer. Yeah, it took me a while to accept that even though I'm a Ghanaian, I've always had a Ghanaian identity, Ghanaian nationality, Ghanaian. I've always been a Ghanaian. Even when we lived in Egypt, at the time, the laws didn't allow you to be an Egyptian if your mother was not an Egyptian. Thankfully, that has changed for so many other children of, mixed heritage, let's put it that way. Now, even if your father is not an Egyptian, your mother is, you can get the citizenship. But at the time, so we always saw ourselves as Ghanaians. But it is true, when I returned, because obviously my culture was mixed, and moreover, I've always had an Egyptian mother who spoke to me in Arabic, who taught me how to cook Egyptian food. And so I came to the realization that, yes, maybe I don't talk like an average Ghanaian. I don't move like an average Ghanaian. Maybe I don't dance like an average Ghanaian. But my thinking, my aspirations are very African, very Ghanaian and African. And I want to make my contribution. I believe I have something to offer because I come from a tradition that is rooted, in a quest for prosperity for Africans, a very deep one. I can't run away from what I represent. I did for a while, but I can't. So I've come to accept that, yes, I might seem a bit weird, not totally Ghanaian, but Ghanaians, I would like them to accept me as I am, because this is who I am. I have this mixed heritage of sorts, but it doesn't take away from my loyalty. It doesn't take away from my patriotism, my nationalism. It doesn't take away at all. On the contrary, it adds to it, because I can bring a network of more people from all over the continent and beyond to help us, to think with us and work with us. So I myself, I suffered a bit from this confusion, but I've come to accept it. And I want people to accept me as I am and to see this as an enrichment, not something, not a minus, but a plus,
Oh, thank you. Could you have, or could we say that you could have made your contribution in Egypt instead of coming to Ghana to do it?
Maybe, but I remember when we were invited to come back, I remember we were terrified because we were still traumatized from the 24th of February. But our mother sat us down. I remember it like yesterday, and she said, listen, if you don't go back now, you are never going to go back. You will never be able to go back. And your father would have wanted you to go to school in Ghana, get to know your country. This is your country. So mother encouraged us to come back home, you see? And thanks to those years when I went to school in Ghana, made friends, reacquainted myself with everything, thanks to those years, even though we left again for many years, but it's on the strength of those years that I could come back and want to link up, with the culture and everything. So definitely I needed to come back, and it was my choice. The first time we were kicked out, it wasn't my choice, but it's my choice to come back. Nobody forced. It is my choice. And like any returnee, like our African brothers and sisters coming from abroad, I always tell them it won't be easy. Even Ghanaians who live abroad for many years, and it won't be easy. You have to adapt to, a new way of thinking, doing things, of talking, of everything. It's never easy. But it's our purpose. Some of us have to be there, some of us have to be here. The important thing is that we have to work together, with one common purpose.
Thank you, Madam Samia, for clarifying that. Now, my next train of question looks more into your father's politics and how he became this Pan-Africanist that we all celebrate. There's been several arguments that Du Bois and other named Pan-Africanists close to your father made Kwame Nkrumah into a Pan-Africanist, basically charting the path for him to take over from the British. As the daughter of Kwame Nkrumah, what are your thoughts on this argument?
We are all influenced by many people. I think I said earlier that our father spent 12 years outside Ghana studying and working, the States, the UK. And because he wasn't from an affluent family, he had to work his way through his studies, and he had to do all manner of jobs, menial jobs, everything. So he really lived with Africans outside the continent. And that alone gave him an insight into the discrimination, injustice, humiliation that the Black man all over the world. So at home, it's colonialism. Abroad, it's racism, exploitation, humiliation. Can you imagine the impact of that on a thinking person, a person who's doing his master's theology, education? He was thinking, look at his thesis, look at conscientism, his book, theology, I beg your pardon, ideology and philosophy for decolonization. That's a full title. So already, of course, his experience shaped him. He came into contact with Du Bois, Padmore, Trinidadian, Du Bois, African-American, so many others. He worked with them. Dr. Dudley Thompson, who passed away, I think, a decade ago, and I met him. And he said, when Kwame Nkrumah was leaving the States for the UK, so they met him, including Padmore. He had this note from, I think, CLR James, I stand corrected, that to give to Padmore, to link them up together. And Padmore opens this note to read, and he said, this man, please take care of this man. He says he wants to lead his country to freedom from the British colonial rule. So of course he must have been thinking about all this. Yes, they helped shape his views on Pan-Africanism. Yes, they influenced and enriched his vision and knowledge. Yes, they all worked together. No man works on his own, or woman. But obviously, this was a man who wrote about, 10 books, who was a organizer par excellence, a writer, philosopher, historian. So, a man who, he did so many things. He had so many dimensions. So could this same man be incapable of thinking on his own? It just doesn't make, and look at what happened when Ghana gained independence. the tentacles that were spread all over the whole world, the non-aligned movement, Asians, Eastern Europeans, former Yugoslavia, the Afro-Asian solidarity. I mean, but how can we dismiss all this? Look at our development plans, the number of nationalities, economists from all over the world who were part of it, who gave their advice, their time, their everything. You know, look at the list behind of economists behind that development plan, the last development plan that was cut short. They're from all over the world. I mean, so obviously we have to give a little bit of credit to that mind. I mean, there's so much documentary evidence that we'll be talking till tomorrow if we want to go into detail.
Definitely. And there are also arguments that Nkrumah himself was a Pan-Africanist and a radical before he left the continent. So we'll,
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. My next question, in a Huffington Post online article by Jen Kiss, I believe. Mind you, this is quite an old article, but still relevant to your push on One Africa. She wrote that Samia explains that Nkrumah has at its center three main guiding principles. That's liberation, justice, and unity. Mm-hmm. At the heart of it is the objective of reversing the consequences of colonialism and slavery by realizing dignity, social, political, and economic emancipation. Now, based on that, Samia, this quote, Samia, people here today with disabilities, people in Africa with disabilities would like to know how you understand dignity, social, political, and economic freedom for persons with disabilities in Ghana and Africa. And what are some of the advocacies, policy implementations that are justice focused on persons with disability in Ghana that you yourself as a politician have worked on during your campaign after being elected and in your continental fight to unite Africa?
I think, honestly, any sincere progressive thinker would not want to leave anyone behind. So all forms of discrimination they don't at all make sense to any person, any leader, not even in politics, in any sector in life, to anybody in leadership position. Discrimination, exclusivity, isolation, it just doesn't make sense. And obviously, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but as a woman, anyone who's tried to beat any kind of discrimination would understand the need to not to isolate anyone. But back to my experience, what I did. I think my experience with associations of physically challenged people is really limited to my own constituency, where, of course, I actively helped and still do with the associations, and we cannot leave that out. We cannot factor that out. So that is what I would say. But whether I initiated policies or there was too much, our work was too much. I was the only member of parliament.
So would you agree that persons with disabilities are always kept at the back burner when it comes to the politics and the politician, and are more called on just to raise their numbers because it's a numbers game when it comes to politics?
Of course.
would you agree that this is what is happening in current Ghana? And how do you, as calling us to help you unite Africa, how would you now shape or move forward the conversation and bring in folks with disability to have this conversation more candidly, to not isolating them, to creating more inclusive environment for them, with school, with jobs, and all this different thing? Because constitutional rights say that they need to be able to work, but we are not creating that. So I want to know, as you calling us to help you unite Africa, what would you do for persons with disability? If we haven't touched it yet, what are we going to do going forward?
Yes, we haven't addressed it sufficiently. There's a deficit there, no doubt about it. I would be lying if I tell you there isn't. We also have been a bit lazy or laid back in taking initiatives, you know? But the best way to do it is to have more prominent people from that sector, you know, who we can liaise with and talk with, and they can be part of what we are doing. We definitely, we need something like an affirmative action of sorts to address this. We need to work together. We need to, because I can speak for people physically challenged, but I don't think I can speak from experience about it. So I always prefer if leaders or spokesperson from that sector would be working with Pan-Africanists. They are Pan-African. We are part of the same continent, you know. Just like we need young people, we need aged or old senior people. We also need women. We need everybody. So we also need the physically challenged to be with us, to work with us, to explain to us, to fashion our policies. I'm sure there are charters on, like when we talk about every child, we don't say the child has to be not physically challenged, you know? When we talk about women, we don't say that the woman cannot be fit. No, so they are included, but I think what you are saying is we need to underscore it.
Yes, because we can't write a policy without persons with disability. And you mentioned physically challenged. Disability is much even broader than just the physical challenged ones. So, and we...
True. Now they've yes.
And what we tend to do is more to write policies on their behalf, right? So,
true.
Across the continent, within the country, this is exactly what is happening. And this is where the challenge is, where the silo working for persons with disability continues to isolate them. And,
So it's good I've talked to you today, because you are raising something, you are educating me in a way, because it's something I have not been totally, fully conscious of.
Beautiful.
So it's good you are bringing it up.
Thank you, Dr.
I would want to work with Pan-Africanists.
Yes.
And
just to let you know,
from the disability sector.
Just to let you know, I wrote my dissertation using Nkrumah to unpack disability. So this is hence why
I would love to read it.
Yes, when it comes to disability, and when it comes to Pan-Africanism, we cannot detach when we're talking about Unite Africa, because Pan-Africanism, we need to be able to contextualize and bring in everyone to make, for nation building. But for us to isolate persons with disability, and Nkrumah, in his work, actually talks about how to make everyone an independent individual, to make everyone contribute to the nation, right? And so persons with disability was definitely within his policy and on the mind of Nkrumah, right? So hence why I think for you going forward, this is something that needs to be dotted in your notes to say it should be one of your agenda. Right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evelyn Kisi, for raising this awareness, this consciousness And I'm also working on a similar project on all these identities that we have ignored. Thank you very much. Do you want to ask your last question, please?
Yes, please. And you are right, my last question. Thank you, Prof. So you've spoken passionately about, again, African Unite, and you leading us to achieving your father's dream of uniting Africa by social, politically, and economically. This ideology, and this is one of the reasons why, for me, also as an African, but a diaspora coming back to Ghana, this ideology and fight of your father has been taken on by several of us in the diaspora, fighting for justice, emancipation, and dignity as well. As a woman trying to walk in her father's shoes, I am sure walking in Nkrumah's shoe hasn't been easy. It hasn't been an easy path for you to take. But within all the social media, the documentation written about you or your family, I am still missing who you really are. And if you are, or you should be the one leading us from Ghana and the fight to uniting or reuniting Africans, especially because your known partner, not really sure if it's your husband or partner, because it doesn't really expand, is an outsider, an individual not from the continent. I would like you to provide us with a visual that situates who Samia Nkrumah is. Can you paint for us from your childhood picture, especially not excluding your privileges, and how it has brought you to center stage politics across the continent and globally?
Okay, very long question. I'm trying to find you. Okay, but okay, let me start by, okay, I'm number one, before I forget, I wouldn't dare even tie the laces of our father's shoes. So I think he's too large for me even to be walking in his shoes. I've always said that we need thousands of Nkrumahs in the African world to do. We need, but what to be able to move forward. But what we need is that mindset, his mindset. We need it badly, you see. But we need to be so many. I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. We really need to be a big group of people who think a bit like him. Huh? So that's one thing. Number two, I think I must be my father's daughter, and one thing is that we don't talk about our lives or ourselves. That's not because we don't want to. Everybody likes to sometimes, explain oneself. But I think it's just a character, the way you are. It's just the way you are. So I like to work with people. I like to work in a group, and I wasn't brought up really to talk about myself much, you see. So it just stuck. This is how our father was modest, our mother was modest, and there you are. I cannot change. I cannot change what I am. So perhaps this is why we don't talk much about our private lives either. But I'm married, but the record is there. I mean, the people talk about, I'm married. I have a wonderful son who's 26, who's working. Yes, we just met. I had something to do in the Vatican City. I was part of a peace initiative, and we had to fashion or draw out a declaration, and he came to join me. He's working for now in Copenhagen, and but he comes to Ghana always, and really is wonderful. I have also a niece and 2 nephews, and I'm close to all of them. I'm the only, I think I'm the only aunt. Yes, you can say aunt. So by default, I'm the matriarch of the family, and yeah, they are all my children, really, in a way. So I believe I have a very strong sense of family.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evelyn Kisi.
That's enough talking about myself.
That's enough.
And just to, last thing, Prof, last thing, because I think I've heard it twice, the privilege or the goodwill. Like we said, I mean, our father was so big that there is so much goodwill, and our family has been sustained not only by governments, as our father had predicted when our mother once asked him after assassination attempt, so how are we going to live? And he said, don't worry, a government will look after you and the children. So we've been sustained by governments, Ghanaian government, Egyptian government. We've been also sustained by friends. That goodwill has meant in our lives many, many friends and many people who've helped us, who've fed us, who've taken care of us, that we've really never been in dire need just because of that good name. So when people say a good name is better than riches, I can tell you from experience, it is true.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evelyn Kisi. We're very grateful and for raising issues around advocacy. As you are aware, I edited a book on disability some years ago. Thank you very much. Let me thank the members of the press who are here, Premium Times, Tribune, The Guardian, and some other newspapers. We are very grateful. During the week, they will report on this interview. I do not know what they're going to say or whether you've said something provocative for them to report. And I must thank so many members of the audience from different countries, from Ghana, from Germany, from South Africa. I saw we have a separate line for presidents of countries. One president joined us on this Zoom. We're very grateful, Your Excellency, for joining us. The president of the African Writers Association, we're very grateful. Representatives from ECOWAS, from the African Union, many professors, as you always imagine, they'll be here, fellow politicians, and some critics, of course, who want to listen to you. Now maybe you'll be competing with them in the next election. We are very grateful to all of you. Before I invite the next speaker, let me ask you a provocative question. Does Ghana have a hero?
A hero?
Yes. Who is the hero of modern Ghana?
I think our Nkrumah is, but there are other heroes too, of course. There are other Ghanaian heroes. There's Dr. Agri, there's so, I mean, I will have to sit and make a list, but there are many heroes.
And of course, you're familiar with the debate around the hero of Ghana, whether the various...
the founder. Yeah, maybe you mean the founder?
So the person who wrote a PhD topic, a PhD thesis on this question, who is Ghana's hero?
Okay.
And she has a forthcoming book on this. Is the next person to interview you, Dr. Mary Owusu. To those of you who are from Nigeria, it's not Nwosu, it's Owusu. And Dr. Mary Owusu, forthcoming book, part of it is based on this question. She does modern Africa. She's written on Prempeh, and she's been teaching for many years, and she took a PhD from Dalhousie University. It was a privilege for me to reunite with her the last weekend in May during the Canadian African Studies Association meeting. Welcome, Dr. Mary Owusu. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I want to thank you too and wish you a happy birthday belated, Samia. And thank you and I'm excited and very privileged to share this forum with 4 wonderful women and 1 man. The tyranny of men.
The numbers are important.
So I want to start from the issue of Pan-Africanism and move down. And I want to start by history, revisiting history, because that's my strength, that's my field. I'm a historian, so I want to revisit the history and then use the past to move forward. So I hope I take, and I have to promise you that I have some very long questions that you really have to listen to at some point. So the first one, which is relatively short, so if you think it's long, that's another story. So your father and many of the cohort of men who founded the OAU in 1963 railed against continental blocs. Yet today, Pan-Africanism remains a dream, kind of utopia. We're going, but we haven't reached there yet. I don't know if you're as familiar with Osibisa's song, We Are Going. So that's the Pan-African song I think about. So we have not achieved it yet. What we have used to achieve feats we can be proud of are the regional blocs. Take ECOWAS, for example. It has successfully intervened in wars. It has promulgated laws to protect nomadic life, and it continues to thrive as a reliable body. Nkrumah's pronouncements about the viability of regional blocs looks to have been disproved. Now, is it time to reframe the Pan-African agenda, to forgo African unity in the way in which the founding fathers dreamed it? And where do you see yourself in this mix?
Okay. So you are saying that continental unity hasn't happened, but the regional blocs have thrived. Yes. Okay, so I want to start from a recent development. Have you heard of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Area Agreement?
Yes.
It is called the African Continental.
Mm-hmm.
They are talking, if you look at all the list of objectives, it is to ultimately make the whole continent one market without barriers, trade barriers, one continental market. I wonder why we didn't think of regional, 5, 6 regional markets rather than one. But I know the answer. But moreover, if you look at the initial proposal for unity that Ghana put forward under Kwame Nkrumah, when it comes to continental integration, you would see that a lot of what is the CFTA today is really what they were talking about 60 years ago. Why it took so long even for something to come to the fore, can go into that. But for whatever reason, Africans have picked that up today and countries are ratifying. And there is hope that we are working towards that in the years to come. Sorry, there's a plane. I don't know if you can hear it. If you live in certain parts of Accra, this is what happens. So back to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Now, one of the reasons that it has reached the point where it is today, it's because there seems to have some kind of consensus seems to have emerged from business leaders, African civil society leaders, maybe chunk of intellectuals, maybe just, Pan-Africanists. But there's a conversion that seems to have put pressure on political leaders to start looking at this, ratifying, consenting, signing. So it means one thing, that in today's world, what can change our economies positively is when you are talking about a billion people. You need a huge market and you need a lot of small economies. It means there's a realization that we need something beyond our regional groupings to make us fly economically. It's a realization, it's an admission, because otherwise ECOWAS would have its market, COMESA its market, SADC, it's, I don't know, all these, we would have different markets, but we have realized it, no, to maximize, because our father was not saying we should not have, we can have as many regional or smaller groupings as we, in fact, he said, let us start unity with the nucleus of those who are willing. So there was no hard or either this or that. No. Let us start, even if it's a nucleus of a few countries, but the objective should be to maximize optimum zone of development. Because why should the African be shortchanged? The bigger we go, the better. We think big, we think the highest, the sky is our limit. So only continental planning, continental integration, continental union, that is what would really shake our economies in a positive way. This is what they were saying, but they were not saying you cannot do smaller groupings. Maybe we'll have to do smaller groups. Did I ever tell you the story of in one of the OAU Cairo summits? And this was told to me by a former Secretary General of the OAU then, which is today the AU. And he said, he was a young foreign affairs officer, Tanzanian officer. And the OAU meeting was happening in Cairo, 64, 65. I can't remember exactly what year. Anyway, Kwame Nkrumah gets up to make his usual, we must unite, integrate our economies, unite politically too. There has to be a common political basis for our integration to oversee and push everything. We must think, yes, we have regional grouping, but we must think of the continent, continentally. We must agree on 3 objectives. We have to have common, political and economic unity. We have to have one defense, one common defense, military command, and we have to have common position on foreign policy. We Africans must speak with one voice. Anyway, he makes this compelling case in his usual charismatic, convincing manner. He sits down. President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania gets up, demolishing every point. He takes point by point of Nkrumah's and just saying, no, saying why it's not the right thing. He finishes his speech. This officer said they were all like almost shaking. There was silence in the hall. You could hear a pin dropping because people were thinking, now what are these 2 giants going to do? What is going to happen? Suddenly, they hear a lone clapping, someone clapping. Everybody turns. It's Kwame Nkrumah. And everybody starts cheering for President Nyerere. And boom, the tension was diffused. But for me, the moral of this story is what? Yes, we can disagree. We go slowly, we go quickly, we go continentally, we go regionally. But at the end, we have to agree to move forward. We have some of us think we do this, some of us think to, but at the end, we have to agree to move forward. And we have to go back and revisit the original idea of unity, because we have to understand what they meant. We have to study it. Whatever is good, we can pick it up and run with it. But we have to sit and deal with it. We don't have to be dogmatic, but we have to study it seriously.
So in one way, you're saying that we don't have to be dogmatic. We should take the good and run with the good. But you're still saying that reframing, because in the end, what we have is that we have been going on this journey, and Pan-Africanism, unity, that's what we want. We are not there yet. We have been using a kind of formula, which is what you're talking about. But I still want to push you by giving you a little bit more historical context, again, to still on Pan-Africanism.
Mm-hmm.
There is a paradox that made leaders of countries that formed the Monrovia Group. So Nigeria, Liberia, the Francophone countries are what I'm thinking of here, suspicious of your father and his motives.
Mm-hmm.
His rhetoric on African unity and how to achieve it without barriers did not match his actions on the ground in Ghana. In 1957, right after independence, Ghana, under your father, passed the Ghana Nationality Act and defined a Ghanaian in terms of one born in Ghana with a grandparent from Ghana. At the time, they said grandfather. This meant that a cohort, for example, of Nigerians were removed from Ghana. By 1966, Ghana had exited from almost all West African bodies. We had replaced the West African currency with the cedi. The West African Court of Appeal was shunned. Ghana left WIFO, oil palm research, and WACRI, cocoa research. The only body Ghana upheld was the West African Exams Council. But perhaps the contradiction for someone who believed in getting rid of the barriers is the fortification of Ghanaian borders and the delineation of points of entry into Ghana by sea, land, and air. Now, the suspicion of the other African leaders whose people bore the brunt of Ghana's quest for territorial integrity led to Nkrumah angrily exiting the OAU meeting in 1963, but for the intervention of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie. So considering the role Ghana played in preserving its barriers and upholding the nation-state ideal, how can those of us who uphold the Pan-African dream build bridges? So, for example, can we talk about African unity that recognizes the borders, and what may a united Africa with that recognition look like?
Okay, I don't know about these details, but this is the same Ghana that was calling for commissions, Africa to form commissions to look into common citizenship and the integration itself. If you go into it, as I said, it entailed a borderless Africa. So I can only surmise that these measures must have been taken temporarily to address a particular situation for a temporary period of time. Because, you know, the sweet thing about Nkrumah is that he has so much documentary evidence, his speeches, his books which he signed himself. So there's so much evidence, his policies, there's so much documentary evidence. So if a researcher sits and looks into all this, the conclusion will be swift and easy to reach, that really Kwame Nkrumah was an advocate, as we should be, of integrating our economies, doing away with our borders, doing away with our separate citizenships. But everything had to be done in a studied manner. Now, even if that was the case, but since he left us a body of work urging us to move forward with integration, people like us who've studied him, how do you expect us to think? We would still go ahead wanting to follow those instructions, but particularly because now, even more than before, you see, before we were new countries, we were euphoric. We had, we started doing things and we had a lot of hope and expectations. Now, our problems are even greater in a sense, even though there's been more development. But it's becoming harder and harder for our separate states to manage on our own, you see? And that's why I think the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has gotten to where it has now, because there's an admission but from all of us that we can't do it alone easily any longer. So I think now the onus is on us now to take the fight up, irrespective of what happened. I know you're a historian, and in fact, I'm here because our father happened, and I believe in what he told us. But I also believe that every generation might have its own strategy, might have its own way of addressing things. The important thing is that the original goal or advice, which some of us still believe in, that we have to act as a bloc. In fact, every time we talk about our debt crisis, I feel that this could not happen if Africa borrowed en bloc. If we borrowed as a continent, we would get much more favorable conditions, lower interest rates. We would be able to borrow even more. Nobody would say, oh, they are not going to pay their ratings down. No, we would be in a much more powerful position to build those badly needed industries we were talking about. So I do not even see any other option economically for our small economies but to integrate.
So I'll just leave.
But the point I want to,
mm-hmm.
because it has some relevance. The point I want to stress here is that even the most difficult or intricate economic decisions need political acceptance and political decision makers to say, yes, go ahead. So that is the political unity that our father was talking about. He's speaking from experience. If there's no common political basis, how are you going to agree on no borders, no taxes here, no bribe tariffs? You can't without the politics. The politics will always be there, and it will be a thorn in our flesh if we can't reach consensus.
So I'll leave this Pan-African thing with reminding you that, today, Ghana as a nation and all the other African nations, we uphold our nation state ideal.
We are what?
We uphold the nation state, concept
yes.
of the nation state. with our city, like what your father gave us. Your father took us out of the West African fabric and made us a standalone. We removed ourselves from sharing a currency to have our own city so that we can be proud. We did many things. We upheld our courts and shunned the West African Court of Appeal. So we did many things that kept our territorial integrity, which is the complexity for me of discussing a way forward in our time for Pan-Africanism. Okay. That the way forward may not be to, as we have done for so long, to think of a no barrier without thinking of what do we have to work with. So in the spirit of, we are going to be thinking through and talking a lot more later on about moving the Pan-African dream forward from ideology to real agendas, like what you're saying now. We have had the trade agreement, but this trade agreement is the ideal situation. The steps, the processes for us to get there. That's the key issues that we probably still all need to think through. So moving from Africa, I want to come to Ghana, and I want to make it a little bit more personal. And I'll start by paraphrasing Professor Abner Dolphine. So to paraphrase Professor Abner Dolphine in When Women Speak, it is a document. If you are a woman in leadership, every day you're on trial. That's Abner Dolphine in paraphrasing it. So if you smile, you are not a professional. If you don't, you are cold. Men, on the other hand, can smile or frown, no problem. How have you navigated this corridor of being a woman leader, Nkrumah's daughter? I am interested in what you might call your legacy in politics and your learnings from participating at the highest level of politics in Ghana as a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, some of us, and I think there are reasons why we feel a bit strong. This is why education is so important, because I think there are certain elements that give you strength as a person, but obviously also as a woman. One of them is education, because education definitely gives you the confidence, a bit of knowledge, and to do things. So I wouldn't have had the courage I have as a woman today if I was not educated. So that's why we need to seriously push for education for all. Number two, even though you were saying ideology, I feel ideology gives you strength, gives you conviction, and it gives you a kind of confidence, because you are not just thinking in any way. There's something guiding you, something you take time to study, debate, even interrogate. You don't have to agree with everything, but it has to guide you somehow. So I don't know, maybe mine could be Pan-Africanism and many things, but it's given me that strength to say, yes, let's go. Yes, I'm prepared to sacrifice. And it even sometimes it protects you from succumbing to temptation, corruption, because you believe in it. You are so convinced of it, and it guides your life, and it becomes part of your life, you see? So I find ideology another thing that gives a woman great courage, you know, and confidence. And another thing is, and I'm talking from all these things, I'm talking about them because they are part of the person I am. Mm-hmm. So I'm speaking from experience and from my life. And the third thing is spirituality. It doesn't have to be particular, it could be whatever religion, no religion, but something has to anchor you that goes beyond yourself, beyond your self-centered or narrow way of thinking. And so, I believe spirituality is one way that grounds you and strengthens you. So for me, I always advise women, my women friends, daughters, it's a good thing to be armored with these weapons when you are embarking on any journey, not just politics really, because they help somehow, they guide you and they sort of protect you even, and they take you a bit out of focusing on self-pity and your fear. They definitely take away the fear, which is a very important, that is something that deters women really from trying to, speak out and get into politics. I've forgotten your main question now, but
no, but you stayed on about what drives, what helps you as a woman in leadership.
You said, what have you learned? Yes.
What have you learned? Yeah, you're learning. So I want to link it to something you said earlier. I want to take you back to ideology, an ideology that I should say here, disclose fully, that I share with you. Proportional representation. I want to go back to that.
Absolutely.
As a solution to corruption and the ills of bad governance.
Absolutely.
South Africa has it and it is working. Could proportional representation be a potential solution to issues of corruption and ineffective governance? You mentioned it earlier, but I want you to link, why we should be thinking about it in the Ghanaian context.
Please, can we turn on the lights?
Yes.
Please, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. The lights here.
Yes.
Give me 1 second.
Yes.
Is it too much?
No, it's good. Apologies. Our partners sent me a message that they need more light.
You are right. We are talking and we have forgotten. Yes. Okay. Definitely proportional representation. I think it's something we really, really have to address. We really have to look at it, study it, and choose the best way for us. But as I was saying earlier, it is all part of many, many steps we must take to chip away at the winner-takes-all state of affairs in our multi-party politics, which is not working very well because we are losing a lot of good people. And the most important thing is we are losing people who could make a very good contribution to our everything, to decisions across the board. So proportional representation is one of the ways of ensuring that different voices have a say, not the biggest say, but have a voice, because votes are given according to a percentage, or the number of seats are commensurate with the number of votes or percentage of votes, candidates get. So at least there's an assurance that my voice will be heard through my representative. And it's also, I believe, a way of bringing us ultimately together a bit closer, which I think must be our objectives in our African states. I believe we truly have to study all the mechanisms, all the ways that will help us sit together to arrive at a consensus about the priorities for our development. Because we are countries that need to reach a certain level. We are countries that have a lot of potential to develop, but we are not there yet. So we desperately need proportional representation. And I believe it also, it reflects a bit or comes closer to our indigenous knowledge systems and our way of doing things, because it is very African to try and get everyone to say what they want to say and discuss it. And even if it takes a whole night or takes days, to lose time, but just to be able to hear and arrive at a decision that more or less, everyone will not feel isolated or belligerent from it, So, and I believe that the day we study our tradition very well and try and incorporate some of those values into our other, what we call maybe modern day systems, I think we would progress a bit more, you see, because essentially we believe in practicing collectivism to an extent, communalism, and proportional representation has a bit of all that. There are some common features in those, as in proportional representation. It's just a way of including more representatives, more representation. So we need to understand that, and more representation, more inclusivity, it is better and more effective at dealing with corruption as a symptom. Because we have to, a point will come. I have a friend who said, listen, Samia, we have to agree that, or admit we are collectively corrupt. I'm not saying it means that I am Samia, I'm corrupt, or you are corrupt, but collectively, the system, even when we see it, maybe we don't say much, or we don't want to talk because of this or that, or we want to save time. So it's there, and it has to be fought collectively with consensus. We can't be forever pointing the finger, this is corrupt, this must go, this is corrupt, this must die. So what about all of us? It's something that's multifaceted, everything. And that requires systems which include many, many more than is at present. So this winner takes all, loser loses all. Honestly, it's so un-African. It doesn't make sense. And maybe that's why it's not working well, because it's alien to our culture. It's not working.
I want to take you back to corruption, because you have been a leader of the CPP. You have been in parliament, and you are one of the few Ghanaian women who can actually say so, that you've done these two things. What did you do? Not so much what did you do, but how did you contribute to the fight against corruption?
Okay, I think really my personal story, and I want to start by, okay, people might believe me or not, but it's actually happened. I get on occasions, I just get some, either Mother's Day, birthday. Some people always remember me. And I got this very sweet message from a clerk, one of the clerks of Parliament. Obviously, I can't mention his name, but very experienced, very capable man. And in my response, I told him, I thank you so much for remembering and always keeping in touch. And his response was, Honorable, how can I forget you? The most honest and incorruptible MP I have ever met. And more than all the other wishes, but that stuck in my mind because I thought this man is confirming what I tried to be, and to be remembered for that, if for nothing else, is good enough for me. So in my personal, I could see my personal story as a politician. This is what I tried to do. I tried to lead by example. And maybe I even overdid it. I mean, some of my associates or friends, colleagues, or people I work with saying, but this is too much. Because I remember I refused any kind of envelope, even envelopes for sittings, which probably that's what people do. I mean, that was common. But I refused because I didn't understand, why do we have to if we are getting paid, maybe, I don't know, I was, new, but it didn't make much sense to me. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't justify it. So I always have this thing guiding me, should you, and this is not, I'm not saying this is coming from someone who's been helped by friends. So it's not because I was, a millionaire or something that I didn't need it. No, all our lives, people have helped us. But certain things I would automatically, instinctively not do. So I tried to lead by example. I mean, I would say that's I wasn't experienced enough. I wasn't in Parliament long enough to see how I could, put this into a larger context, but I think we truly have to think of the ways, the steps we must take to curb this corruption thing. But one of them, honestly, is going back to our culture. Another one is expanding the political space to include more people, because that automatically will make things harder and would demand and require more transparency. So we have to keep on trying and trying and trying. We have to take little steps, big ones, until this goes, because all societies are corrupt. It is just more damaging with a smaller economy, with a less wealthy nation. It's more damaging, you see, but corruption is everywhere. And the corruption that happens in Africa happens with the collaboration of outsiders. It's not isolated. So I don't believe it's culturally specific, but I believe our culture could help us overcome it or address it more effectively.
Thank you. So my next question for you actually it takes us to your politics, because which is where you just ended. So there is a perception in some quarters that you have lost the Nkrumah's fold to the NDC, the National Democratic Congress in Ghana. Now, what are you doing to recapture the Nkrumahs?
Okay,
Do you want me to flesh it out a little?
No, yeah, if you want, yes, if you want, but I understood you perfectly. But you can, or you can interject as I'm going along. So the first thing is, I don't think that's entirely true, because I think Nkrumahism now has acquired a completely different status, or there's a different perception and understanding of it. And I would honestly say that there are Nkrumahists in all parties. I think it's become a national thing, cross-party thing. I meet Nkrumahists from all parties, and so I think it's no longer a partisan thing. Mm-hmm. And this is why I want us to go way beyond party politics. I'm not saying we should abolish party politics. There will always be these groupings because this is how we began the journey, returning to constitutional rule. But I think the solution is in just trying to get the most competent, the best in different ways, and yeah, to come together and steer the ship. I no longer feel Nkrumahism even belongs to Ghanaians alone. I mean, it's become an African thing. It's become a Black thing. It's a way of thinking. It's part of the part of the forces, the strengths of being, I think, an African and a Black person. So we rely on many of things that Nkrumah said or did or wrote or referred to, and we derive some kind of inspiration, breakthrough. You know, we are thinking about, I mean, it's something that comes to mind is in Africa Must Unite, Kwame Nkrumah talks about the Inga Dam in the Congo, why this is a project that must happen. And at the time he was saying, I think it would provide electricity to half or all of the continent. I can't remember the exact quotes. But lo and behold, years later, a group of African entrepreneurs are sitting thinking, that was told to me, this, sitting thinking about how we can build the Inga Dam. And I forgot the point Kwame Nkrumah was making, is that no one country can do it because of the extent, the resources and you know, what it would require. But a group of countries could come together and do it. He was just illustrating, I mean, giving the economic benefits of unification and working together. So lo and behold, today, decades later, the group of African entrepreneurs are discussing with governments, how can we do this in the dam? So I think Nkrumahism and following Nkrumah and being inspired by Nkrumah has gone way beyond anything we had ever thought about at the time. And it's understandable at the time, being boxed in domestic politics. And of course, people would not agree with you on everything. You will have your proponents and opponents, and people fell out and they were, you know, divisions. But now, all these so many decades after, I think really what we this generation and the next one, the one following us, I think we are solution driven. We want to take what is good for us from our thinkers, philosophers, prophets, and just find a way of making them happen, because we just want to make life better for all of us.
Dr. Uso, can I give you one more question, please? Just one.
At this time, they were thinking of renewable energy, which is now something we are all running around thinking of. So my next question and my last question is about Jomoro. I want to bring you home. So in Jomoro, I am aware that you have created economic opportunities. You've poured so much heart and soul into Jomoro, and it seems you're getting nothing. Are you not discouraged? Are you going to run again? If you are, why? What drives you?
What drives me is what has always driven me, that I know I have something good to offer. And you know, if I had joined either of the two main parties that have ruled Ghana since 92, then I would have had a much easier time. I mean, you know, there's no question about that. If I wanted electoral victory, more than anything else, then I would have joined one of the two main parties to win my seats back. But I want more than that. Yes, I want an electoral victory, but I want a more efficient way of governing Ghana. I want us to come together. I want us to have less partisanship. I want us to think in a different, in a creative way. You know, we've tried this, we try things, we try this, we try this. But I want us to try something different, something new. Something new and old, really, because, you know, and it's been proposed before, different words, different, I don't want to go into different definitions and scare some people, but, you know, it doesn't matter what label you put on it. But I think the future for Africa is consensus building, but serious consensus building at the political level, at the highest level. I mean, that's also the essence of unification, of integration. You can't integrate without sacrificing a little, without shedding something of your sovereignty. But what sovereignty? If we don't have sovereignty of our economy, why can't we shed a little for the sake of, you know, a big nation? We don't have it anyway. So, so back to Jomoro. But so it's not, so I want much more than electoral victory, but I believe that will come because I've been consistent and I'm still doing, I mean, I still want to do more and I will continue doing that. So I never give up, I never despair. It's not about giving up, it's not about, it's about me, but not about me. It's, you know, about what I represent, what I stand for. And we have a following and we are going to do things. I hope, I hope by this time next year, we'll have a coconut processing factory in Jomoro that I've been. So there's so much to do, and that's just even scratching the surface. So this is my base. These are my father's people, my people. This is a microcosm of rural Ghana, and it's just a privilege for me to be doing something there and learning, and we never stop. It's if I stop, for me, that is what will make me discouraged and disappointed. Not electoral loss, which is not that certain.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mary Owusu. We have to give time for members of the audience to questions. Please, if you want to ask questions, just use the Zoom to raise your hands. We'll recognize you. You introduce yourself to give many people the opportunity. Be very brief. Francis Chiadi. Please go ahead, Francis. Go ahead, please. Francis.
Yes, my question, it may be interesting to. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. When we're talking about proportional representation, it does not address the current trend where the need for immediacy instead of representation. The whole idea of representation is because we may not be able to be present, but with virtual reality, we can actually participate directly. So direct democracy can be resurrected. So how do you reconcile it with this push for proportional representation when direct democracy can be facilitated through the means of virtual devices? Thank you.
I think it's best you write some of these questions down so that you can take them. It gives you the opportunity to take a small rest, and then you can respond to, write the questions down, please. Thank you. But Akpa.
Okay, we'll ask him.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Prof. I must also comment our guest today. Must commend her very well for how she articulated her view and responded to some of the questions. The duality, but one thing that interests me in her response is the fact that the duality of her identity is such that raises questions on the sensibilities of our humanity. And I think the focus, this time around should be on humanity and development, regardless of where we are coming from. The US, the UK seems to appreciate and value diversity and inclusiveness as major drives for growth and development. And in the light of this, do you think Ghanaians would not, in any way steer emotions, especially from the opposition party, on your dual identity with respect to your political aspirations, not just for your quest for the legislative chamber, but perhaps at the presidency? Thank you.
Bashiru Yaya. Can you ask your question, please? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Jimoh Oluwasegun, Dr. Jimoh Oluwasegun.
Good evening, Prof.
Good evening.
Dr. Sami, and thanks to you for your wonderful reception when I came to Ghana in 2017 at the Institute of African Studies seminar series. Given the historic relationship between Ghana and Nigeria over the years, and Nigeria, numerous collaborations between the governments since 1960 until recently, how will you react to the continuous harassment of Nigeria's SME, small-scale traders in Ghana, in terms of numerous discriminatory policies by the government? You are advocating Pan-African idea, integration of African people, and yet we have a government in Ghana that is bringing up discriminatory trading policies against Nigerians and other African nationals. Thank you.
Michael Vickers. Please ask your question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Madam Nkrumah, that has been a most extraordinary presentation, and I'm just very, very pleased I should be here to hear it, and the other women who have contributed. It could be said that you're making a very strong case that the time has come for women to take a much more significant role in politics and important matters of government and state, because the sense that you're talking, and Professor Falola has helped me to grow up and to learn about these things. and these are the roots, and you've done it so well. The thing that did impress me particularly was your reference to traditions and what we Yimbos sought so diligently to remove from Africa people because ours were thought to be very much better. And we managed to persuade a lot of people that this was the case. But in fact, you have pointed out that there are so many aspects associated with traditional institutions. And I think of places I've been and with Professor Falola, where we have met people, and the flow of talk, the exchange of the ideas, the engagement of local people, the role of chiefs in so many of these areas. And when I feel that we took a part of the colonial undertaking was, of course, to remove the authority of the chiefs, and whether those who have developed elective institutions have made an improvement on that, I'm sure you would have your views, as to the rest of us. So I think my question would be, we have two real power bases, in my view, which are present and fully able for exploitation and use for the people of Africa, whether it's in Nkrumah's sense of the political kingdom, or whether it is in the locality of particular countries. One is that of the traditional institutions relating to politics, culture, economy. All of those things are wrapped up, and they're still there, and they're still working at lower levels. And the other one is, we had not heard much about youth. And again, in my view, when I was teaching first in Nigeria in late 1960s, there were only 5 universities. It's not very many. The students I had, I couldn't understand because they were much brighter than I was. It didn't take me long to figure that out. And but they were. It's a funny thing to hear me say this, but they freed me. They made me feel, oh, this is amazing. And all the prejudices and so forth that have been hammered into me in a parochial, reinforced, privileged background evaporated. I remember my father, if I'm talking too much, just tell me to shut up, but that my father, when I went back and I was living in Canada still at that time, although I had more or less departed for UK, but I was in Nigeria. I had been given the job during the vacation period. Everybody disappeared, and so I was to be sort of acting head, as it were. But then I got called away, and so I had to take someone, and I took a student whom I got to know, Victor Yangador, marvelous man, survived the Biafran War, terrible conditions in the Delta, got out of it, came with Samaluko. You heard of him? No, not Samaluko? Yes, anyway, Sam was a great economist and a most fantastic man. Anyway, he came with him to Ife, University Ife, the crown of African universities, right? Where Falola did all his education for good reason. well, I'm going to forget where I was for the moment. We're talking about a younger daughter.
Yeah.
I left him in charge. My father said.
Thank you, Professor Michael Vickers. He wrote the book on states and politics in the 60s and ethnicities and minorities. Thank you very much for joining us. Temitope Fagunwa, please, a question.
Hello, Prof. Greetings, everyone. I hope I can be heard very well.
We can hear you. We can hear
you. I want to thank our comrade sister for the political interventions and the powerful revolutionary interventions. And I want to say that it was a pleasure meeting up early at the University of Kwame. We salute our dear comrade for the consistency. However, I want to ask our comrade sister about the continuing relevance of Kwame Nkrumah's resolve on the question of the unity of the African continent under a socialist government. I want to know if our communist sister, still think that this position is valid. The question of the unity of the mass of African people under the control and management of a socialist government, as Kwame Nkrumah included many years back. I'm asking this question against the backdrop of how much the African continent is currently under the whims and practices of capitalist forces. It doesn't really matter whether in the north, south, east, or west. The entirety of the continent as at this material point in time as we are engulfed by the backwardness of capitalist social relations. So, Comrade Sister, how do you think that this resolve by Kwame Nkrumah years back is still relevant? And I guess I would also like to know to what extent are the ongoing effort to ensure that this conclusion by Kwame Nkrumah is being implemented, not just only in Ghana, but across the African continent. So I guess I just want to know the extent at which revolutionary organizations in Ghana, are taking up this mandate. I know for sure that we have some comrade organizations that clearly have that convictions as to do, but I think we would appreciate an intervention clearly on how socialist groups, socialist movements in Ghana are taking this task. My second question would be also that to what extent does our comrade sister think that, again, the recent backwardness that has characterized the entirety of the economy of the African continent again is a symptomatic factor of the...
Unless they raise their hands, they have to raise.
So my second question would be that to what extent is our communist sister convinced on the backward role of agents of the international capital in the destruction of the economy of the African continent? And I guess I'm asking this question again to weigh the conviction of our sister so on the question of what is happening in Ghana under the Nana-led regime with respect to how much the president or his presidency, has been romancing agents of international finance capital. How much the government has been romancing IMF, World Bank, to the point at which the Ghanaian economy as it stands now is under a major sabotage by these forces. So, I think these questions are relevant.
Thank you, Dr. Fagunwa, for those two questions. One on the possibility of socialism and the danger of the Bretton Woods institution. Oluwakeredolu. Yes, sir. Please ask your question.
Ma, it's going to be short. Do you think that it is possible to make Africa one country instead of a continent?
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Okechukwu Iheduru.
Thank you, Prof. And thanks, Dr. Samia Nkrumah. I don't know if you still remember me. The first time you and my students met at the parliament was in 2000 I believe 2008. I was leading the director of Arizona State University's Global Education Program in Ghana. And that encounter is connected to the question I'll be asking. During my various trips to Ghana, and I was keenly interested in your political activities and prospects in Ghana's political firmament. So I asked a lot of questions around, from folks in CDD to senior editors, political analysts, some of whom you know, I don't want to mention their names. And so one of the recurring concerns they expressed, in which they attributed to seeming loss of the Nkrumahism steam in Ghana, was they alluded to what they called ideological rigidity on your part, and which they said was largely unreflective of the changed values and quotidian concerns of the average Ghanaian. Unassailable as those ideological purities that they attribute to your movement. And one imperfect manifestation of those changing values was when you and my students met in 2008, the parking lot in the parliament was half empty, and the vehicles there were pretty much sedans. And sometimes some of them knocked down vehicles and so on. But in subsequent trips, as you can confirm today, there is competition for huge SUVs in every available space in the national parliament. Now, it's imperfect, but it suggests the rapid transformation of values, materialism, and so on. And so the concern they expressed was that, yes, you have good ideas, but in terms of managing the political dynamics in Ghana, those ideological purities may not take you very far. And I asked that in terms of the proposals you've been propounding about making concessions, unity, and so on and so forth. Are they wrong, or have you changed from those perceived? I'm not saying they're right, but these are the perceptions that were expressed to me in various encounters. And the other part of my question is the role of Islam and national identity and citizenship in Ghana. Vis-a-vis, especially the role of National Chief Imam of Ghana and other imams in Ghana, vis-a-vis external or ex-African Islamic interests in the country. From Saudi Arabia, Wahhabism, to Iraq, to Turkey, with all kinds of Islamic NGOs in the country, and the impact they're having on increasing violence and sometimes conflict and so on and so forth in Ghana. What implications might this have for democratic politics in Ghana? I don't know if you got, maybe I talked too long, but I don't know if you got my
Your
question.
questions are very clear. Changing values, role of Islam, your questions are very clear. And hopefully the next time you are going there,
yes,
they will not have replaced the SUV with small jets.
Oh dear.
The next person, Gloria, is a name. The name is not clear. Is it Gloria? Your name is not very clear.
Yes, that is Gloria.
Please,
I don't know
Gloria.
if you can hear me. Yes. So
Yes.
I'm a PhD student at the University of Ottawa, and I want to say I'm grateful for this interview because it is particularly significant to my research, which focuses on the barriers of belonging from 1957 to the late 1980s. I'll just be quick and then ask a straightforward question. My question is on how people who were deemed as communist allies or Nkrumahist were alienated from the political polity that was created after the Nkrumah coup. And I'm asking this question in relation to what Madam Samia mentioned about having to seek refuge in Cairo after the coup. So from her experience, which would resonate with my informant, as well as the students who had studied in the Eastern Bloc during the time, I just want to ask from her, what were some of the barriers of belonging she faced after the coup, and then upon her return? I mean, she mentioned her experiences, but I just want to clarify how she felt after, in terms of access to resources, policies of alienation, displacement, and how she felt belonging in Ghana after the coup. I don't know if my question is clear, but thank you.
It's very, very clear. Thank you. Dr. Charles Prempe from Kumasi, right? If I get you right.
All right. Yes, KNUST, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology.
Yes.
So thank you so much. This is so brilliant conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. And I think it should, Prof, this one should continue. And we should have more of this kind of conversation, because almost every nation is in a process of constituting the idea of nationhood. So I think this, for me, brings to the fore a need for a closer discussion on the idea of citizenship, which I think Dr. Merusu talked about, because it's a very contentious issue. I mean, if you take the Yoruba, for example, they've been in Ghana since the 16th century. In fact, currently I'm working on a project on West African Secondary School, and the role that Yoruba played is overwhelming. In fact, in the 1960s, most of the businesses were run by Yoruba people, and yet they were politically isolated in terms of citizenship. Now, if you look at the Peregrinos, who have a long history, again, it brings, you see, people then begin to question the sincerity. I mean, not in terms of Nkrumah, but the whole discourse and project around Pan-Africanism. You know, so if you take Accra Newtown, it used to be called Lagos Town. Why was it suddenly changed to Newtown? I think these are issues we need to talk about. Now, I think the other thing that was mentioned is the issue of corruption. I personally think that we tend to limit corruption to institutions. And so we talk about having more laws, you know, sometimes they say, oh, we should broaden the prisons and all that. But again, we don't talk about the individual responsibility, the ambitions that individuals have, for which reason Pan-Africanism has suffered. Please, do you want to comment on some of these things? Because we've seen the fractious nature that burden Pan-Africanism right from day one till today. Is it that individuals have self-ambitions as opposed to an imagined African ambition? And then tie this to the fact that the idea of Africanism is a social construct. Ghanaianism is a social construct. So how do we navigate around these complexities in constructing or building Pan-Africanism? I'm sorry I've spoken for too long, but...
No, but your questions are very clear. Two questions rolled into one. What happened to the idea of Pan-Africanism in view of the way Yoruba people are treated? That's very clear. Agbon, Professor Agbon. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, my question basically is, we know we have the All-African Continental Trade now. Politically, what relationship does your party in Ghana have with other political parties in other African countries that share the same ideology and the same political view of Pan-Africanism and Nkrumahism with you? Maybe whether they're a minority party or a small party or a big party, because you were talking about the necessity for political agreement in order to actualize any economic point of view. So I thought that at least in each African countries, if they are Pan-Africanists in different parties or they are Pan-Africanist party, what relationship have your party in Ghana with all these other revolutionary parties in other African countries? Thank you.
Shall we answer some of the questions? Okay.
Afrifa Boateng. Okay, while waiting for Afrifa, okay, Afrifa.
Okay, I have two questions, but I'll try to put it in one. First of all, I want to ask my big sister, why is it so hard for Pan-Africanists to forge the African unity Nkrumah talked about? I personally think Africa, 60 years from Nkrumah, have the unique opportunity to forge ourselves an Africa of our own. And this has to be centered with the current trends of the world, irrespective of what is happening in certain African countries. I personally believe that Africa can still do something for themselves, especially when we have Africans who love Africans for themselves. I give a clear examples of the West and some part of Asia countries where the formation of groups or unification of other countries aren't based on basically geographical locations, but it has to be strategic. Our problem in Africa is that over the last 60 years, we are trying to forge an Africa where over 54 countries who may not necessarily like themselves are being forced to form something called African unity, which is not working. So how are we moving away from such thinking, and how best can we approach the African unity, especially when we have templates?
Thank you
from
very
the
much.
West?
Thank you, Afrifa. Your question is very clear, but also bear in mind that within those nations, the same thing is happening. 250 groups in Nigeria, their behavior is not different from what you have just characterized. The last question will come from Professor, okay, two more questions, and that's it. Professor Abaka of the University of Miami. Professor Abaka is an historian of Ghana. Professor Abaka? Abaka, are you still there? I saw him a moment ago, he raised his hand. Don't you prosper? Don't you?
Thank you very much, Professor Falola. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, can we see you, please?
Do you hear me?
Yes, can you turn on your video?
Yes, I'm here.
But we can't see you. Your video is not turned on.
Right.
Don't you prosper? We will go back to Professor Abaka later. Don't you prosper?
Yeah. Good evening, everyone.
Please, let's see you for recording purposes. Yes, go ahead.
Actually,
yes.
there's light out at my place now, so
okay, please. Okay, quickly, please. We are running out of time.
The question I want to ask is in relation to Ghana's commitment towards helping people with disability to involve them in the mainstream educational system. So I want to ask if, from her perspective, has Ghana done enough in terms of inclusive education involving the people with disability?
Thank you. Nicholas McLeod. Nicholas McLeod.
Yes, thank you, Madam Nkrumah, for such a wonderful conversation with us today. In studying your father, I noticed a component of his Pan-Africanism that doesn't get discussed as much is its relevance to the rest of the world in this new, I guess, nuclear race that we've been dealing with the Cold War. And your father came to see himself as a major player in the Cold War as far as being a mediator and linking world peace to imperialism, as well as ultimately the eventual liberation of the African continent. And so I guess I'm wondering, considering Pan-Africanism, your father's commitment to disarmament, and this multipolar world that we're facing today, where do you see the role of Africa and Pan-Africanism in that conversation?
Thank you very much. And here is how we're going to proceed. She cannot answer all the questions. Unfortunately, I will just advise her to choose the questions that she wants to address in terms of clarification. If she has been misunderstood, to clear those. And thereafter, I will call on Amabawa to give us a vote of thanks. Madam Samia Nkrumah, please do not respond to all the questions.
Oh dear, okay. And here I was numbering them. But anyway,
you can if you can. You can if you want to.
No, I even have to be somewhere soon, but thank you for the questions. And actually they were all important. But okay, let me try and put some together. But let me start with the questions related to Pan-Africanism, because I really think we have to take this question, this ideology movement, this objective very, very seriously. I think it's the most important thing we can do, and it's a life-changing mindset for us today. So we need to teach Pan-Africanism in schools. We need to debate it. We need not agree. I can't stress this often enough. It's not a question of us agreeing on everything, but we need to start thinking of what we can do with this great African-owned, African-led solution to Africans' economic problems and to Africans. Ghana has always been committed, since our independence, we've been committed to Pan-Africanism, and of course to disarmament, nuclear disarmament, and over the course of history, we've always been part of blocs that have tried to somehow neutralize, any arms race. So now Pan-Africanism again can play a very important role. In fact, if Africans spoke as one voice, our African states on the continent, in the Caribbean, and Africans residing outside these two blocs, in wherever, Australia, North, South America, Latin America, and Europe, if Africans spoke as one voice on issues, on international issues of international dimension, I think the world will hear us better and louder. And eventually, of course, we would be able to even secure a seat at the UN Security Council, because we would be an economic powerhouse, 1.5 billion people. You cannot ignore that. And you will have to take that block very seriously. So that's another reason why we must unite, not just for our economic survival, as our father used to say, but also for us to be able to have a voice on the global arena and to contribute to world peace. because I remember his famous saying that we don't want to become, we don't want to unite or become a big African nation to be a superpower or to exploit others, but to make our contributions to world peace. Africans, we've suffered sufficiently that we want to be part of the solution to make this world a more humane one. And we are committed to this. So I think most committed Pan-Africanists are proponents of peace as well, world peace. So that's one thing. So that reinforces our need to translate Pan-Africanism into concrete terms, which is African unity and one voice. Okay, the other thing also that, because it's a bit worrying, I mean, that feeling that Nigerians are being harassed or that there are policies against them, people who've lived here for many years. I mean, all this, of course, needless to say, is counter to the Pan-Africanist spirit. And it will diminish these injustices or disregard for non-Ghanaian Africans living in our midst, or xenophobic tendencies, or whatever we want to call it. This will diminish if we have some common basis for our integration, as we are discussing Pan-Africanism. As we truly need more and more Pan-Africanist leaders in power. It's something so important because it will make sure that decision-making has a Pan-Africanist antenna. We need, I can't say it often enough, but we need a Pan-Africanist mindset to deal with all our policies. That should be the prism through which we can think and brainstorm together. And anyway, the only thing I can say is one can try and bring to the attention of authorities these particular grievances, which really shouldn't be. We are one people, and I think we can help each other more if we understand this deeply. I think there was also, there was a comment on socialism, which I don't want to ignore because it keeps on recurring. And it's true, Kwame Nkrumah's definition of Pan-Africanism was the total liberation and unification of Africa under a socialist government, African government. Now I'm paraphrasing, but so it's unity. Socialism was a component of it, and of course that it's understandable, and because the idea of unity is not to exclude any section or constituency of our society in any way, that this prosperity for all, this unification, which is meant to raise the standard of living of the African citizen wherever they are, yes, so must be based on equality and opportunities for all, and socialism. I know we've misunderstood. Sometimes we misunderstand the word, some of the word itself, and sometimes you can say that now times have changed and there's so much jargon and maybe it doesn't mean what it once meant, or people don't understand. The reason some of us who even are, we are socialists or we believe in socialism, but we don't use the word is because we don't want people to get distracted with terms that one has to keep on explaining, but whatever you want to call it, social justice, equality, everyone developing, having, not basic needs enjoyed by all, whichever way you want to put it. And that's an integral part of our thinking and living as African people. We believe we inherently believe and practice communalism, collectivism. I mean, that's the essence of our traditional knowledge and culture and thinking. So for me, it's not too difficult to understand it, and it's not too difficult also to call for it. We cannot progress and become prosperous with so many social tensions and cleavages, and a huge difference between those who have and those who have not. It's a bit of a contradiction with that concept of or objective of Pan-Africanism, all Africans, being part of the motherland, the African nation. So the only reason why sometimes we don't want to stress that side of our thinking is because we truly want to reach a consensus. And at this moment in time, the urgency, the passion, all the work is for us to understand what we need to do to unite, to come a bit closer together. There is no future, there's no secure future for us without it. And anything that divides African people, I think is not good for us now. Even the huge cleavages, social cleavages also, by the way, are a source of division. The same thing, there was a question on Islam. Yes, we are the whole continent and Africans everywhere, we are diverse. As Prof was saying, even our individual countries, different ethnic groups, different religions, different languages, we are used to living with diversity and different religions. And I think we are capable of absorbing that and forging ahead with unity. We are used to it and we can handle that. Islam is a growing religion even in Ghana. And I don't know if the caller was talking particularly about the threat, terrorism, but terrorism comes in different forms, and I totally disassociated from Islam, which is a wonderful religion. I'm not a Muslim myself, but I've had very good friends. I still have who are Muslims. I've read the Quran as an Arabic student. I've studied it, and I think it's a wonderful book. And I want to just say very little anecdotes very quickly. When I first returned to Ghana, I was at a Muslim occasion. I can't remember if it was a wedding or a funeral, but anyway, this old Imam called me and he said, "Oh, this is Nkrumah's daughter. I want to tell her something." So they called me and I went to him and he said, "My daughter, I want you to remember this. I want you to be like your father. Your father was a Christian. Your father was a Muslim. Your father was everything. He would go here, he would listen, do as they are doing. He would go there, he would listen and do, whether it's a mosque or a church, he would pray with them. So I want you to be everything." And I've never forgotten this because yes, this is what we must be. This is how we must think in Africa, not just with religion, but with many things. We must hold on to what unites us and push away or deal with or address what divides us. I don't know if I've left out the disability question. I just want to say that it's been an education for me to be reminded about this yet again. So I will focus on it. I will learn more. and I will see what we can do in the years to come. So I've been educated on that. There's a deficit, and we need to push harder on that.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to call on Ms. Amabawa to thank you on behalf of the Twin Fowler interviews. And thereafter, I will thank our crew. I will play some music thereafter.
Professor Falola, thank you very much for the opportunity to express a few words of gratitude to our distinguished guest. Madam Samia Yaba Nkrumah, thank you so much on behalf of the organizing team. And of course, I'm doing this actually on behalf of the organizing team. Personally, my heart is filled with overwhelming sense of gratitude and respect for you. And my admiration for you has just really increased. How many hours? From 4 o'clock, it's 7:12, and you are sitting on your seat. God, where from this level of energy? Thank you. Thank you for speaking your heart. I believe it's been a very frank conversation, and we've had the best from you. We really appreciate your patience, and we felt that sense of you are at home, where you just don't have to keep anything, and to the extent of responding to questions that your father was supposed to be here to be responding to them, and I felt that. Thank you. Today, one way or the other, I think almost every one of us felt or heard the voice of Kwame Nkrumah intertwined with your own person, with your own voice, and we really appreciate you. To Professor Michael Vickers, thank you, and your team that joined this call. To the over 31 countries across the world with over 50 million people.
It became 36 countries.
It became 36 countries, over 50 million people, 5 presidents across the country who joined us on this.
It became 7.
It became 7. Thank you all. We really appreciate you. Really, this conversation I know is going to go far, and out of it, academics are going to write a lot of papers. Dr. Mary Wusu is nodding, and I know that she's already is on her topic. So a very special thanks to you and to all the people who joined us. Look, your patience is just immeasurable for you to have joined us from 4 o'clock up till this time. God bless you. Today, some way, somehow, we have looked into not just the mirror of Africa. This conversation transcends the continent Africa. We are looking at the global world and issues that really matter to the development of the world and to humanity. So once again, Madam Samia Nkrumah, on behalf of the Afolalah team, we are very, very grateful for your time, and we hope to meet again, this time in person. But I have a very special greeting from a special one of your people here in Ghana, Victor Nanka Bruce. Victor says, I beg your pardon, Hector. Hector says she met you in Cairo, and he says your father was his father was the ambassador then, I think in the 70s. He's extending his greetings to you. Once again, it's a very special thanks from all of us to you.
Thank
you very much. And it's my pleasure to thank our team led by Segun Olopade, all our technical partners. We're very grateful, our photographer, our researcher, Theophilus, and those who made very many things possible, our consultant, Professor Aliso of Brandeis University, and everyone. So we're going to play some music for the next 15 minutes, and